So in this video, I'm going to discuss the experiential impact of the realization process, like how it actually manifests in our experience when these dualistic contractions or knots, when they begin to dissolve or unbind. So traditionally, these experiential impacts are called non-conceptuality, clarity, and bliss. And in this video, I'll speak about the first one, which is non-conceptuality or non-ideation, or no thought, no mind. So there's many names for it. Sometimes it's called non-symbolic experience. Nirvikalpa samadhi would be another name for it. So it's basically a state where our conventional mind collapses and reveals this immense unstruck ground, this pure, unconstructed immediacy and simplicity. So this is not a state where we disengage from thoughts. So this is more like the whole machinery of the ordinary mind momentarily exhausting itself and collapsing in this natural, effortless absence, which is not a negative absence. Like there is deep rest and stillness, and the body feels like a kind of heavy mountain-like solid presence that is simultaneously utterly weightless and transparent and almost like absent, but also very grounded. And I guess this could be called the body of emptiness. And when this state opens up, it's absolutely effortless, just sit still, because all these conventional kind of strategies of the mind and these neurological responses and distractions that are pushing and pulling and creating various types of sensory distraction in our experience. So all of that ceases, right? And there is simply this experience of the body like an empty house. All the windows are open, the door is open, and there is no impulse to defend the experience in any possible manner. There's no impulse to do anything, to experience anything. So the grasping mechanism collapses alongside the like narrative mind, the grasping mechanism, which usually attempts to make something happen or resists, avoids, attempts to fix the experience, attempts to solve a problem. So it's like that root energetic functioning of the dualistic mind is spontaneously severed, and we find ourselves in this natural, effortless simplicity. And it's a very pleasant and natural state, of course, but when it's genuine, there's no reference points, there's no self-referencing occurring, there's no analysis or judgment of the experience, so it doesn't even register as a pleasant experience, because in order for that to happen, the self mechanisms needs to come back online and look at the experience and be like, like, oh, this is so incredible. Like, I'm meditating and there are no thoughts. This is just pure space and total freedom. And I love this. So that can come back later online, that type of, identity, I guess we could call it. But when we are immersed in pure non-conceptuality, none of that's actually occurring, because it's the cessation of the narrative self. It's a momentary cessation of the narrative self. And this is a state that opens up during the awakening process, but eventually what's crucial to recognize and to realize that it is actually not a state. It is more like a stateless state. So this is the natural state of the mind. And from the perspective of awakening, it becomes an hindrance. It becomes kind of like distraction if we start to pursue this type of meditative experiences just for the sake of the pleasantness of having them. It's important to have these openings, of course, so that we get the experiential and instinctual taste of non-conceptuality, that our system kind of gets to saturate in this primordial vastness, in this unborn awareness. And this remembrance can occur, like, hey, that this is actually possible, and this is what I've always intuitively longed for and known to be possible, and now it's here. So it's a kind of deep confirmation, non-conceptual confirmation. So it has a value like that. But if the identity, when it kicks back in, interprets it as, as an experience that it had, and now it starts to pursue it, then it's just going to enhance the seeking mechanism and spiritual ego and the grasping, actually. So that's just a kind of sidetrack in the awakening process. So eventually it becomes crucial to recognize that this stateless state is always present. It's always present. It's not a meditative state, meaning that it's not bound to a meditative experience. It's actually the natural state of mind, the unconstructed or unmanipulated basic state of awareness. And that is there all the time prior to the conventional mind kicking in and starting to construct meaning and starting to build defensive walls and starting to fabricate all kind of avoidance strategies or spiritual pursuits. So it's always here, but it goes unrecognized. It's usually only recognized when the ordinary mind collapses into this basic space. And then this recognition can happen. But at some point, it becomes essential that we don't pursue anymore experiences, but are more interested in recognizing this stateless state within any experience that we might be having. Because it is there. It's not bound to any external or internal conditions. So that's when the line between practice and non-practice, between meditation and ordinary life, that starts to drop away. And we start to intuitively sense into that this is a reality in its natural state, that reality is always meditating, kind of. It's always the sensations that arise moment by moment spontaneously. It's just pure meditation. The thoughts that appear, it's just pure meditation prior to the conceptual dualistic mind kicking in and starting to push and pull and react to the thoughts. So prior to this, thought actually arises as pure transparency, as nothing other than no thought. So this is something that becomes increasingly more clear after the initial awakening shift has occurred, and especially after the non-dual realization, which is a very specific shift. It's a very specific dissolution of a perceptual filter that maintains this type of basic sense of duality in the experience, like here and there, this and that, self and other. So when this primary filter dissolves, what goes with it is actually a capacity to enter in states of consciousness in the same way like it used to be there. This is something very difficult to explain because it doesn't mean that the experiential aspects of reality do not manifest anymore when we realize formlessness, when we realize non-duality, because they definitely do. Alongside the realization process, there can be quite spectacular phases. But when this primary mechanism that divides experience in a very subtle way into subject and object, into this and that, into here and there. So when that vanishes, there is no beginning or end to anything. There is not actually ups and downs anymore because it all gets so permeated, saturated by this non-referential openness within which there is no actual movement, no actual arising, no actual cessation. So when that becomes very clear, this is when the non-conceptuality is no longer an experience we are having alongside the awakening process or during an awakening insight, but now it's realized to be the fundamental fabric of reality itself. And then the practice becomes maintaining, this recognition in a effortless and spontaneous and natural, uncontrived manner. So this is the cessation of the path as a means to get somewhere or produce something, to make something happen. So the path becomes this non-action where we notice how the grasping mechanism apparently obscures this fundamental, pristine, unstruck immensity. But that very grasping mechanism becomes the path itself at this point. It's the way the realization deepens and clarifies its own nature, this pure conceptual nature. So there's a kind of sharpness and stark, piercing force to the power of realization, to the way it functions. So this non-conceptuality is not some sort of static state. It's not some sort of blank state. It's actually impossible to say anything about it because in itself, it has no qualities whatsoever. When it combines with the other experiential impacts of awakening, which is clarity and bliss, then it has this very creative and even explosive dynamic nature, like radiance, the way it spontaneously manifests. But when those two other experiential aspects are kind of withdrawn and dissolved into this pure simplicity, there's kind of like nothing we can say about this pure non-dual experiencing that would characterize it in a meaningful manner. Like we can try to talk about it, but the words will definitely fail and they will sound kind of nonsensical. So some people describe this as experienceless experiencing. I think that's pretty well description. So what's interesting here is that non-conceptuality is a term that is often used in the non-dual culture. And I think it can be extremely easily hijacked by the mind, by the conceptual mind, the ordinary mind, into a kind of subtle mental construct. Because during the awakening process, we might have these very genuine experiences, openings, cracks, flashes, glimpses, states into pure non-conceptuality. But we are not able to maintain them on as long as the fundamental dualistic structures are still operating, like the self structure and these structures of reality like time and space and distance. So when non-conceptuality opens up as a temporary state, then it's very easy for mind to kind of understand it and make a view about it. And the ordinary mind also has every now and then these type of periods when it doesn't experience any thoughts. So this would happen, for example, if we do an intense physical training, like an athletic training, that the thoughts simply stop. After we finish the effort and we sit down, there are no thoughts. Like mind is just still. But this kind of thoughtlessness is not the same as the raw, naked awareness of the ground. So this kind of non-conceptuality that is part of the way the ordinary mind functions, it has a little bit like blank quality, like neutral quality, but in a sense that is almost like boring. It can feel a little bit like checking out. It can feel like a slight numbness, like a slight dissociation. It can have a little bit like a trance-like relaxation, pleasantness to it. And like oftentimes when I hear people these days in the spiritual culture, in the non-dual culture, talking about these type of states that, you just realize that the thoughts are just thoughts and you just observe them and you are able to kind of tap into this type of apparently non-conceptual space. To me, it often sounds like it's still the ordinary mind functioning there. It's still this dualistic mind where there is a knower of the experience and something that is known. And that's not non-duality. And often when I hear the teachers kind of validating these type of experiences or insights and saying that, hey, that's awakening. When you just realize that you are not your thoughts, that's awakening. And I do understand why they say that, because it's one of the crucial kind of epiphanies on the awakening process. But at the same time, the way I see awakening, and this is just my view, which might be radical or I don't know, might be maybe offensive to some people. I don't know. To me, this is not awakening. This is actually still a subtle form of conceptualization that is operating there. This is not Rikpa. This is still ordinary mind. yes, the thoughts may have ceased into this very pleasant nothingness. There might be a restful state of mind, a peaceful state of mind, and a kind of sense that, oh, this must be just awareness, as opposed to being entangled compulsively to narratives. And that's great. I know it makes a huge difference if you've been entangled compulsively to narratives and conceptualization your whole life. It's an extremely pleasant experience and a relief to drop into consciousness. But this is not primordial, unborn, unstruck immensity. It's just not. So we need actually quite intense concentration and focus here in the process. A kind of deep clarification needs to happen so that we are able to recognize this pure non-duality, this pure non-conceptuality, no mind. Because only that will destroy or dissolve the seeds of ignorance, right? Like immersing yourself in this type of experiences within conventional mind where there are no thoughts or the thoughts are just being observed, that will do nothing, for the root cause of ignorance in our experience. It remains completely intact. So we need to penetrate deeper. And that's where the other experiential qualities of awakening come into play, because they introduce this dynamic aspect of the way the liberation functions. So this penetration into the core of our embodied experience by the awakening clarity can actually occur. But the foundation is all the time this non-conceptual recognition of what I was pointing towards in this video. No thought, no ideation, unconstructed immediacy prior to any meaning making, prior to constructing meaning or deconstructing meaning. So this is there during a thought, after a thought, prior to a thought. That's the gap, right? But the gap is always the case when this is realized. That's when we live in the gap. The gap is no longer a momentarily experience in the awakening process. The gap becomes the primary, inexplicable, like ungraspable, direct, visceral, felt, empty sense. So one of the very practical ways to point out the difference between the two, like the kind of non-conceptuality of the ordinary mind and the non-conceptuality of the primordial ground, is that it's vividly alive and present, even it's completely non-experiential. Whereas the non-conceptuality of the ordinary mind, it's kind of a little bit static. Like nothing is really happening there. It might be very pleasant, but it's a little bit like checked out state. Whereas the other thing is like total unmediated presence, but without any reference points, without any self-referencing, without any measurement, without, here or there, this or that, without me, without world, without mind, body, awareness, energy. So everything just collapses into this presence, this other simplicity, right? It's just so natural, it's so simple. And when the experiential aspects, like this experiential potentiality of this simplicity is not playing itself out, yeah, it's literally like nothing, but at the same time, it's never boring. Because the concept of boredom is exactly that. It's a concept, and this is non-conceptual. So I'm going to make other videos about two other experiential impacts of awakening, like the clarity, Ösel, it's called in Tibetan, and bliss. So that will also clarify more what I was presenting in this video. But generally speaking, usually when we get our first initial awakening experience, that kind of sets us on this path, whether we know it or not. Oftentimes we don't consciously know it at that time at all. But at that moment, these qualities are playing itself out completely unhindered and unobstructed in our experience to a certain extent. Like to some person, it might be more subtle, and to another, it might be like very dramatic and like extraordinary, but it doesn't matter. Our system is somehow instinctually getting a taste of liberation by this introductory experience. And that is then oftentimes followed by more glimpses and then dark nights. So dark nights are periods in the awakening process where these experiential impacts, they apparently completely disappear. So it may feel like, oh, we don't anymore have access to awakening, but these are effects of awakening. So the dark night is all about exhausting the identity that is still grasping for experiences or experiential aspects. So the dark nights are a crucial part of the awakening process. They are actually an aspect of awakening in itself, but what characterizes them at the conscious level is a kind of spiritual dryness and emotional dryness, energetic dryness, because apparently like none of this is suddenly available, like non-conceptuality, bliss, and clarity. So actually what the dark night is doing is kind of like immense compression. It's like kind of pressurizes our identities so thoroughly into the core, kind of forces us to withdraw our projected vital energy from the exterior pursuits and pull it into the center, right? So that this recognition of unstruct, unmediated ground, is no mind, no self, that can occur. So the permanent awakening shift can happen. But for the identity, this doesn't often look at all like awakening process, because how the initial awakening experience often feels like it's something that enhances the identity. It sets you on a spiritual journey, on this incredible exploration and discovery. So the identity is still quite intact. But the dark night is that which is like very precisely starting to demolish the very structure of identity itself. And that is then demolished in multiple layers. So that's why there are multiple dark nights most of the time, not just one. and some of the dark nights that follow the dissolution of the identity structure, they're kind of like echoes of that same principle working itself through. So it's that echo of the grasping mechanism still functioning, but not as a problem, not as anything that needs to be solved, but as an invitation to fearlessly engage to this game of awakening now from this lived experience of non-conceptuality. So the kind of ultimate insight here is that the ordinary mind, the grasping mind, the dualistic mind, is the unconditioned mind. So that's why I'm calling it the path itself. So when we look directly into the grasping, into the mechanism to try to do something, it will reveal itself as a wisdom energy. So the mind undergoes this very profound transformation and refinement and restructuring during a genuine realization process. So it's not just a disengagement from thought processes, but it's like a kind of like a cellular mutation. So the awakened mind, this radiant, vivid, uncalculated display, kind of uncompromising engagement with reality. That's the wisdom mind, where samsara arises as nothing other than nirvana, where suffering is no longer suffering, where there is no need to deny suffering or avoid suffering, but also where suffering has zero reality because it has been completely kind of alchemized at its core to this radiant display of emptiness, of no mind, of bliss, this release of energy and play, clarity, this very vivid, crystalline clear sense perception is unfiltered. Ungraspability of the transience of the unblemished brilliance of that which cannot be destroyed because it's not born, that which is causeless and utterly mirage-like, utterly dream-like, but also intensely, delighting in its own non-existence. So it's not a blankness, it's not just a boring nothing. Those are all conceptualizations. So I'm just describing this as well as I'm able to in this moment, because I'm passionate about this. And I know that this piercing through conceptualization can be done, but it does require like immense concentration and pulverization of the ignorance at its root. Otherwise, it will just be temporary glimpses.